You are now relearning economics.
Welcome back to the live stream. It is Mr. Keynes and Dr. Keen, the economic live stream. But guess what? Steve's not here. He's gallivanting around Asia right now. Not sure what part. We had, how about Dave? Dave's can't come around. He's actually got a day job and has to do real work. We have Dan. I reached out to Dan. He's not here. Who else? I have Doug, but he's busy actually working on projects that I should be working on with him at this moment. Then we got Mike. Mike is here. He managed to show up. Had a few issues with a member of his household. Maybe I'll let Mike discuss that. I want to cover a few topics. First and foremost, make sure you are hitting that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and comment. Comment in the chat. Let me know what's going on. Comment after the video. If you watch this later, comment. Any questions? Comment. One, I like answering the questions. The channel has been growing over the last month. And two, it helps with the algorithm, right? So, say great show. Even if you got nothing to say, just say great show. Good job, Ty. Good job, Steve. Good job, Mike. Something like that. That helps, Make sure you're hitting that like button. Do all that fun stuff for sure. Let's check out the chat. Is there anybody around? Let's bring it on. I've got cool little graphics going on now. So watch this. We can run it. And I think I can make this chat dynamic. And there we go in the back. You can't really see behind because Tony has filled up the chat. Tony, how you doing, buddy? Hope you're well. 3 o'clock in Australia right now. Crazy, crazy, crazy fellow. Colin, welcome back. Good to see you again. It's always good to see the initial chatter. So on the relearning channel where we are now, obviously our views have gone down, so it takes a little while for people to roll in. I noticed that on my Tuesday show. I was really worried. I think I had like one hello right at the beginning of the word. Zoe, hello, Zoe. One chatter for the first 15 minutes. I'm like, holy crap, this is embarrassing. But it did pick up about 30 minutes into it. Dr. T's in the house. Best guy in the house. Good to see you guys. Excellent stuff. Got all these graphics going on right now. What do I do with them? Do I take them down? Look at that. Take that down. I wanted to talk, in the show, a few topics here. I wanted to talk Joan Robinson, famous post-Keynesian, the first post-Keynesian, some would say. Huge, as some other people might say. The best. She has a quote out there, and I often post it on my Twitter X page, where she says investments essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, investments precede savings, and in fact cause savings. And of course, when I post that, I get in a lot of trouble with the Austrian folk out there, the Austrian economic folk, and a lot of people, just the average individual, right, that conceives it from a very micro perspective. And I just like, you know what, I got to write a blog about this. And I did write the blog, put it on my Patreon, put it as a paid blog. It's for my Patreon members. You can find me patreon.com/relearningeconomics. So I make it like paid for a week, and then I'll end up posting it on X, which I have, 10,000 followers now. So, get it out to a wider audience eventually. So I decided to do this post. And I think before I bring Mike on, I'm going to read it out. I'm going to give it out. This paid blog, this famous paid blog. I'm going to read it out. And then we'll get Mike in and to jump on the opinion. I know he's a Joan Robinson fan. I know it. We all are. She was a good-looking woman back in the day, too, when she was alive. And in the 30s, she was a really good-looking woman. I'll tell you. I might get canceled for just talking like this about famous dead economists. But anyways, whatever. So we're going to cover that. I'll probably read the blog, then bring Mike on. Another thing I want to cover is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So we got a new head that's going to be confirmed by the Senate, supposedly confirmed, which is AJ and Tony. And he's very conservative. He was kind of part of the Project 25 thing that was going around before Trump was elected. Um, and I want to talk about that because, my job is very data driven. And because I'm modeling the US economy, I have a wealth of data that I can depend on. And there are discrepancies in data, and we know how to work those in. But it gets a little bit scary when we start talking about fudging data, and Trump hasn't said this himself. Nobody is suggesting that, like in a real sense, but there's insinuations that, some numbers could be fudged to make Trump look a little bit better. Um, and so that's concerning. That affects me directly. And I already kind of deal with, the discrepancies in data and how do you work that into modeling? How do you account for it, right? If you're trying to even back test, for instance, and you're using data and a lot of different data sets, and in system dynamics, you're dealing with an interconnected system. If one data set is off for just collection reasons, right? Because a lot of these data sets are surveys, right? Condensed surveys like weekly job numbers, etc., or a CPI, for instance, right? Is a survey of households, right? So it's there's going to be statistical errors, but you hope that it's as close as possible, right? And you try to work within those bounds, but we'll cover that. And then at the end of the show, I want to talk a little bit about system dynamics. And specifically, I want to talk about Stella, which Mike uses. And I want to talk about Ravel, which I use as a drafting board before I put it into Python and build out any applications. And I thought we'd do the same model, a simple model, and it's an SIR model. So it stands for susceptible, infected, and recovered. And we'll model in both interfaces and just show the difference and give everybody a lot of people watch the show and their eyes glaze over when we start talking about ordinary differential equations. But system dynamics software is really set up so you don't really have to worry about the technicalities of math too much. Too much. I quotation air marks too much. You got to know your math. And I think the idea of doing something like that is just to make sure everybody has accessibility to system dynamics, right? There's lots of free packages out there. You can get the paid packages and stuff. Vinsim's a great example. The PLE edition, which is free. It has some features blocked off, but essentially it's a full-fledged system dynamic program. So we'll get into that at the end of the show. You know what? I'm going to read this blog, and then I'm going to bring on Mike, and I'm going to get Mike's opinion, on this quote. So I'll read the blog here, and I titled it, Investment Creates Savings. Joan Robinson was right. Joan Robinson once said, it is the rate of investment that governs the rate of savings, not vice versa. The first time I came across this line, it stopped me. It runs directly against the neat little diagram in mainstream economic textbooks where people save first, and those savings are then loaned out to businesses to invest. In Robinson's view, investment comes first, savings follows, and once you look at how the economy actually works, her logic is hard to ignore. When I began exploring the Goodwin growth cycle model, I realized it provides a clear way to see why Robinson's claims hold. The Goodwin model focuses on two variables that move over time. That's the employment rate and the wage share of output. When businesses invest more, output grows, employment rises, and workers gain bargaining power, pushing wages up as a share of output. The higher wage share can squeeze profits, eventually slowing investment and bringing down growth, which lowers employment and weakens wages. And this cycle repeats. The key point is that in Goodwin's world, growth is driven directly by investment. The decision of firms to spend on new capacity is the spark that sets the whole process in motion. There is no need to wait for households to save more beforehand. Now, this raises some obvious questions. Where does the money for investment come from if it's not from prior savings? That is where modern banking changes the picture entirely. Banks do not wait for someone else to deposit money before they can lend. When the bank issues a loan, it creates a deposit in the borrower's account. That deposit is new money. So if a firm wants to invest, it can borrow from the bank and create new, and that credit injects fresh spending into the economy immediately. The spending boosts income as it as income rises, some of that new income is saved. In national accounts, saving and investment always match after the fact, but the investment decision came first and caused the saving to happen. Now, once I saw this, something else clicked. If households are saving more out of their income, they're consuming less. That means less revenue for businesses selling goods and services. Lower sales means lower profits. Lower profits tend to discourage future investment. So, a higher household saving rate today without an offsetting source of spending like government deficits or exports can actually drag investment down. This is the opposite to the idea that savings fuels investment. In reality, high saving can choke it. Now, economists like Steve Keynes have extended Goodwin's model to include private debt and bank credit creation. And this makes the chain of causality even clearer. Firms invest based on expected profitability and demand. If their own profits are not enough to finance what they want to invest in, they borrow. Banks create that credit they need, which rises spending, output, and employment. The extra activity lifts incomes, and the savings show up only after the income has already been generated by the investment. If households decide to save more instead of consuming, and nothing else picks up the slack, profits fall, and so does investment. The story about demand leading the way, this is a story about demand leading the way, not a fixed pool of savings waiting to be lent. Now, seeing it in this way kind of completely changes the way I think about policy. If the goal is to raise investment, it makes sense to try to boost savings first. The priority should be to give firms reasons to invest and ensure the financial system can supply credit and make it happen. The savings will follow automatically as a byproduct of the extra income that investment creates. But if households are pulling back on spending and no one else steps in, the process can go in reverse. Investment slows, income stagnate, and the hoped for savings never materialize. In the Goodwin growth cycle model, investment is the engine that drives everything else. In a world where banks can create credit, the engine can run without being limited by prior savings. Robinson's statement is not just a clever turn of phrase, it is a simple truth about how the monetary economy works. Investment sets the pace, and savings is just the shadow it leaves behind. Now, from that perspective, when I wrote that, I was thinking from a monetary perspective. Now, you can make kind of arguments from the real economy about real resources happening to be saved. And I've had these arguments on Twitter with people. And the reality is, capital goods are generated from other capital goods that are extracted from the ground. So if we consider what's in the ground savings, you can have semantic arguments there. But I think it's time to bring on Mike Radzicki and get his opinion on the topic. Mike, first and foremost, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing very well. And yeah, I'm loaded with opinions. I'm an economist, so,
Perfect. So this is the point where I say, unload the opinions, Mike. Let me know what you're thinking.
Well, you a lot to unpack. You raised a bunch of different issues here. Mrs. Robinson, I've always said since I was a PhD student some 45 years ago that Mrs. Robinson is my all-time favorite economist. And I met her in not the very first day, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks into my first macro class as a PhD student, so I was 2 weeks, I was a graduate student for 2 weeks. And here's Mrs. Robinson. And of course, she was quite elderly at the time, and I was quite young. But you didn't mess with her, man. She was very cordial, but when you asked her technical questions, she was very aggressive in her answers. And she went on a rant, I recall, about equilibrium. Somebody asked her about the concept of equilibrium, which of course she did not like, and she went on a big rant about that. I actually raised my hand and asked her a question. And I asked her, if you were to teach a macroeconomics course, what textbook would you use? And she answered, I don't use textbooks. I use real books. Next question. So, but I really liked her stuff. The only thing I didn't care for was she didn't like math, the use of mathematics in economics. And she would always say, I never learned mathematics, therefore I had to think. And I think now I believe she was reacting to the mathematics of her era, not to modern simulation tools and what have you. Now, you were mentioning, her well-known quote that investment causes savings, not the other way around. But of course, that comes from Keynes, right? That was one of his main insights in his attack on classical economists and the loanable funds theory and what have you. And so the question becomes, well, why did classical economists, even today, those who believe in the loanable funds theory, how did they arrive at that? Now, I don't know for sure, but I can speculate. And that is back in the day, years ago, when you did modeling, you didn't have computers. So if you did, let's say, dynamic modeling and you use difference or ordinary differential equations, you were confined to one page, more or less, and a pencil, right? And so you had a first order system, a very simple thing. Well, what I'm getting at is many of the famous models in economics from back in the day are called corn models. And the idea was you would have one output in your economy. It was corn. And then you could either consume it, eat it, consumption, or save it, not eat it, and plant it, invest it to make more corn. So there, saving did cause investment. And you get into, the golden rule of accumulation. What's the optimal amount to save? If you save nothing, you starve in the future. If you save everything, you starve in the present. So, what's the optimal rate of saving and stuff like that. But I think it's historical. So I don't blame economists. I mean, it starts the way it starts. Where I do blame many economists is, yes, in 1939, that's how you did it. But we're not in 1939 anymore. We have all of these modern tools, and there's this resistance to kind of, breaking away from the old. They're locked in. It's like the U.S. is, I think I've mentioned in the past on this live stream, the U.S. doesn't use the metric system. We use it a little bit, but not universally like everyone else in the world. Well, why is that? Because we're locked in. There's the cost in terms of mental intuition, people unlearning and relearning, and all the retooling and re-signage and whatever. It's just you're locked into the old ways, and I think that's true of some economists. Anyway, that's my initial opinion.
Now, you talked about real resources, and an example, somebody saves their corn and replants it. Mm-hmm. What about the monetary aspect in a modern sense? Does Robinson's quote and Keynes' insights originally hold? Is that a fair quote for me to post on X?
Right. So those models, those corn models, those simple models were usually devoid of money. Okay. And to the extent, again, back in the day, there was money, it was usually sort of based on a gold standard, which, yes, back, 100 years ago, that was accurate. So again, place and time. Did it make sense back in the day? Sure. Present day, not so much really. But going the other way, where Keynes always said, I'm going to turn the classical economists on their head. I'm going to get rid of Say's law. The loanable funds theory, the saving causes investment, preserves Say's law, right? Because with the circular flow, you make $100 worth of goods and services, you distribute the $100 worth of goods and services to land, labor, capital, and so forth, banking if there is finance, in return for being used in the production process. And then, of course, they spend that $100 on the $100 of goods. But what if they save? Well, that leakage is reinjected through investment spending, and all is well. So Say's law, supply creates its own demand, is preserved. Loanable funds, a market for loanable funds with an interest rate, saves the day. A market saves the day. But what Keynes was saying is, no, you've got it backwards. Investment, which is fundamentally caused by animal spirits, attitudes towards fundamental uncertainty, you either go ahead and pull the trigger or you don't. You tap the brakes on that new plant and equipment, that new facility or whatever. So if there's optimism, if there's animal spirits, right, then entrepreneurs, managers, whatever, they go ahead and build that new facility or invest in new plant and equipment. And as you correctly said, through a multiplier process that expands the economy, expands output, employment, and what have you. And then even if the fraction of income saved is constant, they're saving a constant fraction of a larger national income. And so saving is generated. And if you go back, if you will, to equilibrium after that shock of investment spending, ex post, you will have saving and investment equal to one another. So Keynes flipped it around. One last point is, the role of the role of interest in the classical model was to, in the loanable funds model, was to compensate people for the pain of saving. So the higher the rate of interest was offered by the banks, the more people would save, and then that would be borrowed by the firms and used for investment spending. Keynes said, no. The reason for interest, he gave a bunch of different reasons, but one of the main reasons was to reward people, not for the pain of saving, meaning I have to postpone my pleasure, my utility from consumption, but for the pain of being illiquid, right? So the more my interest-bearing assets can yield, the more I'm willing to keep my my wealth in the form of non-liquid assets, right? I'll be being illiquid, right? So Keynes just really said it's a whole different way of thinking about things. And of course, Mrs. Robinson helped Keynes write the general theory, right? So Keynes wrote the general theory from 1930 to 1936. And he was helped by the Cambridge Circus. So the circus was a group of younger faculty. Keynes was a big cheese at the time, younger faculty and essentially PhD students who would attend lectures. Keynes would write a chapter draft and he'd give a talk on it. And he'd say, what do you think? And they would give him feedback, right? And so Mrs. Robinson was part of that. And of course, so in a sense, she helped Keynes write the general theory. So when she would say, modern Keynesian economics is bastardized Keynesianism, Keynes without a father, the sort of the neoclassical synthesis from Paul Samuelson and all that, she should know she helped the man write the book. so you give her a lot of credibility.
Right. So so that would be the new Keynesians are the bastard children of Keynes.
Yeah, well,
correct?
I would say the orthodox. So after World War II, people like Paul Samuelson came around and wrote a textbook, right? And they had heard about Keynes and whatever, so they made the Keynesian cross diagrams and all that. Actually, it was really Hicks, Mead, and a couple others who made mathematical models in the 1930s of what Keynes said, try to boil it down to these equations. And again, Mrs. Robinson didn't like math. And she said, you're missing, like, how do you have fundamental uncertainty in that sort of model? So she just said, it's wrong. It's not what, that's where you get the post-Keynesians. And so you had sort of the original Keynesians, the orthodox Keynesians, the Paul Samuelson types. The new Keynesians were a response to the rational expectations revolution in the late 70s, 80s, 90s that had taken over the profession. And that switched prior to that, to the rational expectations, macroeconomics was about stabilizing an unstable system, a system that was doing this, and you wanted to damp that down or even eliminate that if you could, right? And that you had Keynes's stuff was always sort of a buffer stock system, a stabilizing system, whether it was the Bancor for international trade or his macro ideas. Let's stabilize an unstable system. When the rational expectations people popped into the world, they changed the focus of macroeconomics to a chess game, between government and the public and private sector. And so I know that you're going to do that, but you know that I know, but I know that you know that I know. And so you get into Nash equilibria and all this game theoretic sort of chess match rather than stabilizing an unstable system. So that dominated the profession, and it became a free market thing because, the only way to sort of defeat that, if you're a government official, is to lie to the public non-systematically. Because if you lie systematically, if every time you say we're going to raise interest rates, we're going to lower them, they'll learn. They're rational, right? So you don't want your government lying to you and whatever, blah, blah, blah. So you got to go free market. So that dominated. Keynes is wrong. Trying to stabilize the system is a folly, right? And this chess game rules the day. Well, the Keynesians said, the orthodox Keynesians, or their prodigy, their younger folks said, we're getting killed by this rational expectations thing here. So what do we do about it? Well, they said, we've got to put rational expectations into our otherwise Keynesian models and show that Keynes's insights still hold. So the new Keynesians, that's what they do. And a lot of it is sticky prices, the menu, Mankiw's menu cost theory that, yes, markets change prices, but not instantly. I'm on a contract as a professor. My price doesn't change until the contract ends and I sign a new one, right? And the menu, like a restaurant with a vinyl menu, every day, the price of eggs changes by 2 cents. They don't reprint the menu. That was the original idea, right? Prices are locked in, or they're sticky. They're not locked in forever, but they change quite slowly. And because of that, even with rational expectations, you can get Keynesian results. So
you brought up
it's a lot of opinions,
so that's new Keynesian economics is kind of the advent of frictions and models to kind of pull it a little closer to Keynesian economics, but not quite. I've been kind of fascinated. I've never read enough about the new Keynesian synthesis or the neoclassical synthesis. Oh, that's a tough one this morning. I don't know what's going on there. I haven't read enough because it's just not that interesting in it for me. But it's so essentially, I want to get this right. It was trying to bring a little bit of Keynesian into the neoclassical realm. Is that essentially what new Keynesian is?
No. This is just my opinion. I don't know if what the truth is, but my opinion is the classicals are the new. So the classicals, Keynes defined the classicals as anybody who believed that Say's law was true. Keynes didn't believe it was true, that supply created his own demand, and neither did Marx. Everybody else did. And so during the Great Depression, that meant that, hey, markets can fix this cyclical that we're down here. We can be and something's screwing with the market, right? There has to be somebody's putting a stick in the spokes of the free market. That's the only thing that the classical economist, as defined by Keynes, had to offer. FDR, Herbert Hoover, the British government, whatever. And so Keynes says that can't possibly be right. That's what I was taught. Keynes was taught that stuff, but it can't be right. So he said, I'm going to set about thinking of a new way to do this. And in the process, he created what we know today as macro. And through hindsight, the economists that preceded Keynes, the classicals, were using kind of a microeconomic approach to the economy, to instead, it's like the market for pickles rather than the aggregate labor market. So the classicals were run off the road by the Keynesians. The Keynesians, then World War II started, so forget about it. So after World War II and into the 60s, Keynes ruled, the Keynesians ruled, and they were stamping out the business cycle and using government intervention, the budget and whatever to try and stabilize things. And then the free market folks didn't like that. And so Friedman was trying to do his monetarist thing, and it was kind of a tie. The monetarists didn't run the Keynesians off the road. It was, in fact, I think the Keynesians were running the monetarists off the road by and large. But then Lucas came around, and he brought this rational expectation originally created by Muth. It was the Carnegie Mellon School sort of initiated those ideas. And then he brought it into macro in a way that was consistent, right? And he changed the whole focus. So if you're following, the new classicals now ran the Keynesians off the road. So the new Keynesians say, we're not going to take this. We're going to run the new classicals off the road. And we're going to do that by, they're beating us over the head with a baseball bat called rational expectations. And every journal wants to see that in the model. It's this chess game thing. So we're going to take that rational expectation baseball bat and beat them back. We're going to put it in our models and show the circumstances under which Keynes is still right, even with rational expectations. And that's when you introduce the sticky prices or the frictions, as you said, in the labor market.
Right. So another thing you mentioned that's of interest, and I think you probably have insights, from your perspective, was Hicks and the LSIM model or the IMLS model?
ISLM, investment, saving, liquidity, money. Yeah.
Now I read an article, and this article was on the Mises Institute website. So questionable, the validity of the research by the individual. He was very the conspiracy type guy about, Keynes being a communist and whatnot. Do you think the split between Keynes' original ideas came with Hicks and that model? Is that model based on Keynes' original works? And there's arguments that Keynes had back of the napkin notes that actually was that model. This is some of the conspiracies I hear out there. Or did that really have nothing to do with Keynes' original works? Like, what do you know? You've been all through economics. What's your perspective?
Right. So after Keynes wrote the general theory and it came out, it wasn't widely understood. In fact, some reviews and top journals said there's absolutely nothing new here. And Keynes is like, what? I'm revolutionizing economics, and you're not. And he's going, I wrote the book for my fellow economists, and they're not understanding what I'm saying here. So we got a problem here. Keynes, even though his doctoral dissertation was a theory on probability, he was very mathematically adept. The style of that era was to not use a lot of math, if at all, in your economic books. So the general theory has almost zero math in it. It's not zero, but very, very, very little. So how do we get the rest of the economics profession to understand what Lord Keynes is saying? Now, Keynes was going to go on a speaking tour the next year in 1937, and he had massive heart problems that eventually killed him in 1946. And his doctors would not let him travel. He had an infection that went to his heart. They didn't have antibiotics back then. But he couldn't travel. So he was dispatching doctoral students to the places like Harvard to explain it. But of course, they're students. They're doing their best, But some of the British economists who knew Keynes and were in the loop on this stuff said, well, if we write equations that capture what he's saying, maybe the rest of the profession will figure, because it's instead of the prose, it's going to be math, right? And so there were like 6 different economists, some of whom went on to win Nobel Prizes, but in the 1930s, they were very young, who produced mathematical models of what they perceived was in the general theory. If I were to condense it to 6 or 7 or 10 equations, what is Lord Keynes saying? One of them was Sir John Hicks in the ISLM model. Now, if there were like 6 of these, maybe there was, I don't remember, it's like 6, it's 5, 7, whatever, but let's half dozen. How come Hicks, Sir John Hicks's model became the one? And the answer is Alvin Hansen. Alvin Hansen is known as the American Keynes. I guess you're the Canadian Keynes, but at any rate. So Hansen was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he reviewed the general theory right when it came out in the Journal of Political Economy, very famous journal out of the University of Chicago. And he said, nothing new here. And then by chance, he moved on to become the chairman of the economics department at Harvard. Okay. And then this is 37, 38. And Keynes was sending his students around to explain the general theory because people weren't getting it. So Hansen entertained his guests, and they started a Keynes seminar. A student in that seminar, by the way, was Dick Goodwin. Another was Paul Samuelson, for example. And Hansen has an epiphany. He's like, oh my God, boing, the light bulb goes on. This is new, it's different, whatever. And he became like this fervent, fanatical Keynesian, the American Keynes. He's responsible for getting Keynes adopted by some US governments after the war and what have you. So Hansen goes, if I, Alvin Hansen, the chair of the economics department at Harvard, didn't understand what Lord Keynes is saying, how can anybody else possibly understand it? So I'm going to write a book called A Guide to Keynes. And it's considered to be the Rosetta Stone of Keynesian economics. You know, the Rosetta Stone had what? Hieroglyphics, Greek, and something else, some other language. And we couldn't understand hieroglyphics. I think Napoleon's soldiers found this thing. And you could then translate the hieroglyphics into Greek, which was understood. You could decipher it. Well, to decipher the general theory, you used A Guide to Keynes. And here's the point of the story. Hansen picked Hicks's ISLM model to be featured in the book. And in fact, Hicks didn't name it that way. Hansen named it the ISLM model, and it's often called the Hicks-Hansen ISLM model because his book was used everywhere. So it popularized the ISLM model. And that's what Mrs. Robinson would call bastardized Keynesian, because she says that doesn't capture the essence of what Keynes was saying. Then Samuelson, who had been a student there, graduated and went to MIT, and he said, they told him, you got to teach young engineers economics. He had been exposed to this new Keynesian stuff. And again, Samuelson's like, I can't be throwing the ISLM model at freshmen. So he invented the Keynes. He worked backwards, and he created the Keynesian cross models that appear in all the textbooks to this day. And again, that's bastardized Keynesianism. To complete the story, the neoclassical synthesis was, this is different than the traditional economics. So Samuelson and Solow and MIT kind of came up with, at the macro level, we use Keynes, but at the micro level, we use traditional neoclassical economics, and we're trying to figure out how to sort of blend those two things together. And that was the neoclassical synthesis. But all that stuff is what Mrs. Robinson rejected. The post-Keynesians, they're the ones who, the lineage is allegedly, true to what Keynes was actually trying to tell us.
Just for anybody out there, I got a huge lecture last week from LP Rashan. He was on the show a year or so ago. When I say write post-Keynesian, it has to be with a lowercase p. It has to have a hyphen, and the K must be capitalized. Just if anybody else wants to get into the community,
that sets people off.
Holy, I was being very kind to the post-Keynesian community, and I can't remember what post it was, and he was like, no, that's got to be a lowercase p, and you have no hyphen. So that's right. Another important aspect. I've got a question here. I've got a question. You might know Mike. Has Mike heard of the liquidity theory of asset pricing? If so, what does he think? The book is by Gordon Pepper and Michael Oliver.
Short answers, no, I have not heard of it. I will tell you the world of finance, though, is divided into the efficient market theory folks from Eugene Fama, and then Bob Schiller's sort of behavioral approach to finance. Showing that economists do have a sense of humor. the Nobel Committee jointly awarded them the Nobel Prize in economics, even though their two ways of thinking about asset pricing are at odds with one another. I think they both have or contribute to hedge funds based on their views on things. The liquidity theory of asset pricing, I don't know it, and I don't want to guess what it might be. I'd be using Chat GPT or something to figure it out.
Can you talk? I'm just inviting. I think Steve's going to show up. Can you just talk a little more about asset pricing while I send this email, or just yap about what's up with your dog? Actually, can we talk about your dog live? Is that a private thing? What was wrong with your dog? Or yeah.
Well, we have a beagle, and she is 4 years old, and she is the most intelligent. We've had dogs. All of my wife and I have had dogs all of our adult lives, and she's the most intelligent, sweetest dog we've ever had. The other ones weren't bad, but she's really very good. She's a very picky eater. But other than that, a wonderful dog. And for the last week or two, she's been very distressed, biting her paws, scratching herself. Her ears are red and whatever. And if it's a day or two or three, you say, well, maybe it's a pat. Maybe she got into some poison ivy or something. But no, it was... to the vet we go, and actually the vets were very jammed, so we had to go to another town where we could get in, and they did a whole workup and gave her a shot, and we got some meds and stuff, and we're going to circle back in a week or so and see if everything's working. But yeah, she's a member of the family, so when somebody's sick.
I noticed that too. That's Marty, my dog. He'll actually, when his ears are irritated, he'll start biting at his paw. It must be a nerve reaction for dogs where they'll start chewing on their paw, and I know right away
can't chew at their ears, so.
Can't chew at their ears, and sometimes it's gotten really bad, like we were talking before the show. Big floppy ears, hair. Sometimes I hear him go off in the back, and he'll be scratching his ears so much. This was when he was younger, before we realized we had to keep up on it, and you'd hear a little yelp, and it was like, oh jeez. Oh,
but it wasn't anything serious as far as the vet was concerned. So hallelujah. But you got to address these things before they get out of hand.
We got Steve in the house, Mike. You want to bring on Steve?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Hey, mate. Hi there.
There he is. There he is.
Hi. Yeah. Total accident, because I'm in Bangkok at the moment. Long story. The personal financial catastrophe I had a couple of weeks ago. That's the reason I'm here. That makes it sicker than your dog. And then I'm teaching in Malaysia, actually teaching a course at an Islamic university basically on Ravel. Thanks, Douglas, on the new book. I'm very pleased with how it's been received so far. So I just hang on, but my mic seems to have changed as well. Not sure how that's working out. Anyway, I can't sleep because my body reckons it's 8 o'clock in the afternoon, in the evening, when it's close to 1 o'clock in the morning over here. So I just saw the live stream and thought, shit, I wonder if I'm at the right time. So here you go.
Yeah, you are at the right time.
What's the temperature there?
I think I'll look on the phone to tell you that directly. Time is 45 minutes past midnight, and the temperature is 26 degrees.
So in Fahrenheit.
That's not Fahrenheit. That's not Fahrenheit.
Not too bad. That's not
Celsius.
That's not too bad. So the other night, it stayed here, and this is Western Canada, so a northern latitude. It stayed 23 Celsius all through the night, which is warm.
Oh, wow, that's your part of the world. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's we're going to look back in the when do you date the first holy shit catastrophic climate event? To put the lie to all the garbage the neoclassicals point out, one possibility is that what was the town called in Canada that got wiped out by fires after floods? Two towns.
Two towns. So the most recent one was last year. A third of Jasper. Which is in a national park, Jasper National Park. A third of it, we actually toured it when I went over to Alberta last month just to see the damage, which it was devastating. So it's in a national park, and you used to go through there, and you had the Rockies surrounding you, and 1/3 of the Rockies was just this bare gray, and these are glacier capped mountains. So you see
Wow.
where the tree
Okay.
line goes up to the alpine area, and then it's glacier above that. It's all gray below. It's just devastating, and it was devastating to see that one house would burn down and the house beside it wouldn't. It was
Yeah.
just it would have been
It's the
just
wildness of fires. Yeah.
yeah, incredible. And then 4 years ago, we had what was termed the heat dome, and it was far worse. So we were at 40 Celsius here. And I know
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, that's just a walk in the park. But for here, that's climate change. And
Yeah.
we lost the majority of a town called Lytton. And they have rebuilt there. This year, they're having a fire again. So it's troubling for sure. And
Yeah.
the more since Steve, you were here in the winter, so you kind of
Yeah.
see some of our geography. We've got the ocean, we've got huge
Mhm.
mountains, we've got desert plateaus. So we're the
Yeah.
type of place that we're going to see the effects of climate change before other places, because we have that diverse
Yeah.
geology, environment, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it can be troubling. Steve, we
You guys, you guys are candid. I think the Texan girls will win, but anyway. Yeah. Question.
Steve, we were before you came on, we were actually talking about Hicks. We were talking
Oh
about
yeah.
the
Oh, John.
ISLM. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about Joan Robinson, how she states investment precedes savings.
Mm.
And all of that. Any comments you want to make? I know you missed all the questions here, but anything you want to say about investments preceding savings?
Well, it's actually what I'm
Hicks.
actually what Hicks in particular I'm intrigued by, because he have you ever seen this is dating myself here, Mike, I'm sure you've seen it. Have you ever seen the movie The Bridge Over the River Kwai? Yep, I knew you would have, Mike. Okay.
Yeah.
And
You're not that far from it.
that's true. So it was a bridge in Thailand, which was being built by slave labor of captured Allied soldiers, Japanese war camp, etc., etc. And it's the stories are apparently true. I think it's right, isn't it, Mike? It's might have been Hollywood exaggerated, but it was true that a
Oh, 100%.
colonel,
You can go
yeah,
tour
a
it. Yeah.
colonel, yeah. Though there was disorganized chaos. The Japanese weren't controlling them, and that was causing various breakdowns. So this colonel organized everybody to really enjoy building the bridge, and then his allied troops came along to blow it up, and he stopped them. And then he thought, my God, what have I done? And then he went and blew the bridge up himself. Now that's my vision of John Hicks, because when he first read the general theory, he clearly could not comprehend what he read, but he'd actually published a paper in 1935 that is pivotal for what we're doing today. And that was he tried to build a model of an economy moving through time, producing goods and services, generating profits and wages and so on. But of course, he did it from a neoclassical point of view. So he started off as saying there's bread, the economy produces bread. Okay. And then there's a market on the Monday. This is all out of the article. Market on the Monday that sets equilibrium prices, which hold for the entire week until the next Monday. When then what happens is, and this is the fun bit, you either have sold the bread or you've turned the stale bread into ovens. Now he didn't actually say that, because he suddenly realized, hang on, I've got a market, I've got a system making bread, but I don't have any way in which the bread itself can be made. And so in the middle of this, he starts thinking, how can I handle three different markets simultaneously to reach equilibrium? And what he then did was the ISLM diagram, saying if two of the markets are in equilibrium, then the third market must also be in equilibrium. Okay, so that was the model. So he attempted to build a dynamic model, and I really fell for him, because I literally faced that dilemma when I built my own multi sectoral model just recently. I guess it's just a long-winded answer, but I saw Mike give a long one, so I'll keep on rolling. Anyway, over time, talking with, and this is something you'd know the bit of the history of too, Mike, talking with Paul Davidson. Davidson finally convinced him that the only point at which that applied was the intersection of the two curves. Okay, because if you've off one curve, only if, even in Walrasian terms, if two markets are in equilibrium, then the third must be. But if one market is in equilibrium, the other two can be anywhere. Okay? So therefore, the ISLM model only worked if you didn't have time. And that was finally when Hicks basically realized he'd blown up Keynes with the sort of reverse process. He reinterpreted Keynes as a marginalist, and that became the way that Hanson's interpretation and so on took over, and that became bastard Keynesianism. So that 35 paper was absolutely pivotal. Then his relationship, and a very positive relationship with Paul Davidson, who was not the easiest person to get on with. I can speak from personal experience. We became friends, but it was a difficult struggle. But yeah, he's somebody who realized what he'd done, oh my God, and tried to reverse it. But unfortunately, the reason most neoclassicals don't know about this paper is that as a tribute to Paul, he submitted it to the Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics. So most neoclassicals wouldn't even know the article exists.
So just if anybody, who's watching the show and your eyes are glazing over, this is kind of what we're talking about here. Either Steve or Mike, can you describe this diagram and what's happening in it, just so everybody understands exactly what the topic matter is?
It's a pretty bad version of an ISLM diagram. You want to go for it, Mike, or will I? Actually, can you find one with a stronger curvature to the LM curve?
I can stronger curvature, and while I'm doing that, Steve, I'm going to dedicate a show to your new book when you're back in Europe.
Oh, yeah,
but
okay.
but talk about it. It just came out. Tell everybody what's going on with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, watching political catastrophes around the world last year, my first impulse was when I saw Rachel Reeves' ridiculous speech at the Labor Party conference. I thought, shit, I've got to write something to enable rank and file Labor Party members to fight back against Reeves and Starmer. Started writing that book, and then bloody Musk drags Donald Trump onto the American throne, and thought, oh shit, now I've got to get Musk on to get over his nonsense, because all his arguments about what's going to happen if government deficit doesn't get cut were pure household analogy. And I thought, he said in his own writings, you've got to work from first principles. So, well, I'll write a book, macroeconomic money and macroeconomics from first principles for Elon Musk and other engineers. And it was slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it's also, if he says he's a mathematician, then he can read differential equations and understand conservation laws. So I went through all that. Much to my amazement, it's not high in sort of Kindle, all Kindle ranks by any means, running about number 20,000, but it hit number one in macro and micro. Just on its release as only Kindle version. So I'm actually very pleased with its reception.
Good stuff. I can't really find a better version.
I'll go looking, and if I find anything, I've got my own versions, but I might do it in the background while we chat.
Really, I don't think we need to worry about stronger curves. What is this what is this diagram? We're not looking at beautiful women here. We're looking at lines on a graph.
That's better. That's slightly better. Okay.
Okay. So
what this was, yeah. It's a neoclassical model. This is the first thing for most. Hang on, I sort of got reconnection loss too. Neoclassicals will tell you it's a Keynesian model, but you read where it came from, and this is John Hicks in the original. It's a model involving a Walrasian general equilibrium. So you have a two markets. It's got investment and savings, which is fundamentally an investment, LM, which is the money market, and they have the point of equilibrium with the two, and that is where the economy will operate, because economy is always. And then to integrate what he called Mr. Keynes and the classics, a suggested interpretation. That was the name of the paper where Hicks dreamt up this model. What he said was that the LM curve was kinked because the LM curve is in interest rates. And the way that curve is drawn there, you've been seeing interest rates falling to virtually zero. But he said, no, in fact, there'd be a floor to interest rates. They wouldn't fall that far. And then equally, when you had a high level of economic activity, the LM curve was much more vertical. That's why the curvature matters in that way. And then the IS curve is supposed to be real output, but also the government's contribution. So the government could deficit spend and move the IS curve to the right, thereby increasing income and output, but also raising interest rates. Or it could be pushed to the left, and that could lead to a depression. So the idea was that the left-hand side, where the LM curve is fairly flat, is the Keynesian region. If you do fiscal policy down there, you'll stimulate the economy towards full employment. But the other side, there's the neoclassical. That's when you've got a high level of economic activity. The LM curve is virtually vertical. And therefore, if you increase aggregate demand at that point, you don't change output all that much. You just make interest rates rise. That's the way it was interpreted. So it became like it's a Marshallian diagram. It's exactly what they learn in. Can I use French? I think I can. You can use French. These fucking first year microeconomic courses they do. Supply and demand. It's exactly a supply and demand diagram, but it's now glorified as something in macroeconomics, and that's why we got that Keynesian the Keynesian overthrow by the reinterpreting as of Walrasian.
So now that we got Steve swearing and all hopes of my channel ever getting monetized, I will say make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment in the chat or comment after in the video if you have any questions. That helps a lot with the algorithm. The next topic I wanted to talk about was the BLS situation. So the Bureau of Labor and Statistics in the US, and the new nomination EJ and Tony. Steve or Mike, have you been actually Mike, because you use system dynamic modeling. Obviously data, when you actually apply a model to the real world, is pretty important to you. What's your thoughts on this situation going on? Obviously, it's derived out of Trump not liking the revised labor numbers. We all know that revisions are made all the time in economics as we get more and more data. That's part of the process. What's your thoughts on the whole situation?
I'm not terribly surprised. Number one, this is what politicians do. If you don't like the numbers, get somebody who'll redo the numbers. The question is, how do you separate legitimate increases in human knowledge as to how to properly assemble the numbers versus political machinations that are intended to harm or harm your enemies, help your side? And you can do things. There's a very famous book, I think from the 1950s, called How to Lie with Statistics, right?
Oh,
and
yeah, that's a great one.
Among the things that they show you is you can take the exact same ordered pairs, plot them on a graph, and if you change the scale, exact same numbers, you can make it look dramatic or not at all a big deal.
I do exactly that. I do that exactly, Mike. When I used to teach micro, I'd take the neoclassical, downward sloping demand curve. And the idea was that if you flatten the curve out, you get a whole lot of horizontal curves. I said, sorry, if you have a whole lot of horizontal curves, you put them together, you've got a horizontal curve. Okay? You've got a downward sloping line, cut it into small little bits, you get a downward sloping line. But if you want to fool people, rather than taking a square, the actual graph, you take something like that. And every time you do it, you're flattening and flattening and you're extending the x-axis far more than you're sampling the y, and therefore you make things look really, really flat, or opposite to make things look tall. Yeah, great little trick, and critical to neoclassical economics.
Yeah, but so any stats, I don't care what it is, sports statistics, whatever, you've got to take it with a grain of salt. A mean, give me the average, whatever. What are you referring to? The mean, the median, or the mode? And without a measure of dispersion, you're not really getting the whole story, and on it goes. Now, having said that, I did look up, because the name escaped me, but there's a site that's called Shadow Government Statistics by John Williams.
Oh, Shadow Stats, yeah.
Yeah, and what he does is he says, all right, let's plot whatever, inflation, unemployment, whatever it happens to be, as it is now, and let me redo it for you. The way they did it in 1990, the way they did it in 1980, and then let's compare, right? And you can see that they've been changing how the data are compiled and the statistics are created over time. Have they completely hidden it? No, they probably made a press release. Does anybody pay attention to that stuff? No. So if you take a look at the site, it's called shadowstats.com. If you take a look at it, he has a lot of stuff there. And he's one of these guys who's kind of watching what the government is doing with their stats. So to sum up, I'm not terribly surprised that this happened. I think politicians, by and large, try to use any advantage they can to stay in power, to get their way, whatever. And manipulating stats is the whole part of the deal.
Yeah.
And you've got to be vigilant as a consumer of this stuff to have a fighting chance to, if you want to buy into whatever's being said.
Do you think there's a long-term risk? Now, we can all agree that the United States does really well at data collection for economics. Is there a risk to that integrity over time, or is the bureaucracy of the BLS so strong that a figurehead change by Donald Trump to Antony really won't have much of a relevant
I think it'll
effect?
do damage. I think it'll do damage. I mean, if you I know quite a few statisticians in their various industries, and they really do take their work very seriously. And to be treated this way, the reaction likely to be, I'm out of here. If I've got I'm within 5 years of retirement and I'm a senior person, get me out of here before this, another 4 years, forget it. I think they're going to lose a lot of senior people. And then that, again, potentially degrades the knowledge of the system, and that will be something which is very hard to repair.
Yeah, I think a couple of points. One is, any individual number is is it measured correctly, incorrectly, measurement error, that's just a human error, or is there a political thing? But really what you want to look at is the trend. Is something that's bad going up, or something that's bad going down, and this sort of thing. So I think that's one way to, in some sense, inoculate oneself against being duped. And the other thing, Ty, you mentioned it, and it's absolutely extra confusing to the public, is data revisions. So GDP comes out, at least in the US, on a monthly basis, right? So you say, oh, it's a monthly stat. No, it comes out monthly, but it's a quarterly stat. What? Well, the January number is the first estimate of the fourth quarter of the preceding year. The February number is the first revision to the January number. And the March number is the second revision and the final one that goes in the books to the estimate of the fourth quarter's GDP. Got it?
And all this stuff. I know. And all this stuff you could slowly replace it with, real-time feed readouts of all the electronic sales machines around the planet.
You wonder with technology how this is going to change.
Yeah. And so this stuff is aggregated by the companies. It would be a case of saying, hey, we don't want the actual numbers. We're not going to pry into your privacy, but we want the flow. And you could be doing real-time estimates of GDP. So that's huge investment, and that's the last thing. He's going to invest in a gold ballroom. That's much more useful for the planet than improving the quality of statistics.
I think you wonder, just as a hypothetical thought experiment, in the basement of Goldman Sachs, in Lower Manhattan or wherever they are now, where they've got 400 PhDs in mathematics and physics and what have you, working on, trying to predict stock prices or which markets are in favor and whatever. Are they really using the aggregate government stats anyway? Or do they have web crawlers out? And, I suspect with big data and stuff, I bet you they're looking at a lot of other stuff other than, prior to, the modern technology, modern data, you were at the mercy of, what the state put out. But now maybe they just avoid, or they take it like, okay, it's fine. They're really doing other.
Yeah, the ones with the handling on it definitely were doing that sort of thing. Yeah. Front running the data.
I don't mean to backtrack here, but I want to make sure, Zoe, this was in relation to the ISLM model. Does the interest rate in this sense mean the base rate or something else? And Steve, you were discussing
the base rate.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the base rate. Yeah, I mean, it is something. It's a toy model, and that's literally what this. I should tell you what. I'll just let you guys chat for a second while I find that article by John Hicks, and then let's get the John Hicks's opinion on the model that was built by John Hicks. Chat away, and I'll find it for you and come back.
So one of the original Hicks articles
was a great read.
Was Mr. Keynes and the Classics, as Steve said, right? That's where the whole ISLM thing originated. And then, as Steve correctly said, he renounced the ISLM model in his later years, in the like the early 1980s, I think it was. Maybe it was the 70s. I don't know exactly when it was. So Hicks reversed himself. So when John Hicks was still alive, Robert Solow, another Nobel Prize winner, was asked to give the first John Hicks lecture at Oxford University. And so Solow said, what am I going to say? Because Sir John is going to be sitting right in front of me as I'm giving this talk. What can I possibly say? So Solow's lecture and the paper associated with it is titled Mr. Hicks and the Classics, a spin on Mr. Keynes and the Classics. And in the paper, Solow says there's two John Hickses I want to talk about. Sir John Hicks, the old Hicks, and young John Hicks. And he told Sir John...
He called himself JR in the earlier.
Right. He said, Sir John, don't be so hard on JR, that the ISLM model isn't really that bad. And he said it's part of the intuition of all modern economists, the trained intuition of all modern economists. And there are some flaws that I'll point out and acknowledge, but overall, dude, it's not so bad. And it's an easy read. So for those interested, he kind of summarizes all the issues with ISO.
And it's also bullshit because it was a dramatic rephrasing. If have you read the book by Laurie Tarshis that Jeff Harcourt used to rave about?
No, but I know of. Well, I knew Jeff, and I know of Laurie, but I have not read.
Yeah, Jeff always used to say that Laurie Tarshis got this summarized the general theory properly, and if that had been the textbook, we wouldn't have had the neoclassical resurgence. So I've got to look at it one of these days and actually take a good quiz. Jeff knew his stuff on large parts of the history of economic thought. But here's Hicks anyway. In this article, ISLM and explanation, and I basically introduce it as ISLM and apology. And then this is the opening sentence. This is from John Hicks for those neoclassicals might be tuning in here, and particularly Paul Krugman. The ISLM diagram, which is widely, but not universally, accepted as a convenient synopsis of Keynesian theory, here's the punchline in the sentence, is the thing for which I cannot deny that I have some responsibility. And he then says when he first brought it up with Mr. Keynes and the Classics in 1937, but then he said, in fact, he's got to go back to earlier papers because in those papers, what became the ISLM model was already developed. And he says, it is important here because it shows, I think quite conclusively, that the model was already in my mind before I wrote even the first of my papers on Keynes. In other words, this is a neoclassical model. It's not a Keynesian one. But then he saw similarities that he could dress it up that way. But then, and there's lots of the articles, it's almost all text. Actually, I don't think there are any equations at all in it. But he comes down to say that you've got to have, to get it, and this is a dynamic point, to get stock equilibrium, you've got to have flow equilibrium. So he goes through these necessities. And then he finally says the liquidity money curve is supposed to be there for expectations of the future being uncertain. But he said there's no point in certainty if you're actually no uncertainty if you're in equilibrium. I'm paraphrasing that badly, but I'll read out what his final punchline is here. He said for the formal concept of equilibrium, you need to have equilibrium applying all the way through the time period. So his had what he called a short and a long period, and his short period was the week when nothing was allowed to change during the week. And then what happens in the long period? And he said, well, the whole succession of short periods when no change occurs, nor can that happen in the long term. So he said, and this is now back to quoting him, that is the formal concept of full equilibrium over time. I do not see how it is to be avoided. And this is the real punchline here. But for the purpose of generating an LM curve, which is to represent liquidity preference, will not do without amendment, for there is no sense in liquidity unless expectations are uncertain. So he then started to realize that, this again, if you're out of, the only point that made sense as well was the intersection of the two curves. Because at that point of intersection, two markets in equilibrium, the third market must be in equilibrium. But if you're on one of the lines, but not at the point of intersection, there are two markets out of equilibrium. You can be anywhere, and therefore time and uncertainty and so on. You cannot use those Walrasian concepts for macroeconomics. And what do neoclassicals do? They use Walrasian concepts for macroeconomics.
So this is great, Steve. We're going to move on to the next thing. And now that you're here, you're going to participate in it. I assume you have
Damn. Okay.
Yeah, I assume you have a copy of Ravel on your laptop you're using, correct?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I can see the confidence as soon as I said that. So at the beginning of the show, I said, we're not
going to do Murphy, are we?
No.
Without him actually being on stage.
We'll save that for when he's around. I wanted to compare Ravel with Stella, and I wanted to do an SIR model, and I wanted obviously the Ravel model to be done in a godly table. And I will define. Now, I was going to do this. I didn't think you were going to show up, Steve.
Hang on.
But now that you're here, you can. Well, you don't worry about it. You'll be instructed to do it second, and I will give you instructions, Steve, to do it my way. And same with you, Mike. Instructions. So basically, I will define it the way Jay Forrester would have defined it. We will figure out the stocks we need first. We will figure out the flows that are going to either accumulate or deaccumulate those stocks, and then we will bound the model with parameters or constants, and I will give you those values and initial conditions, and then I will let you run wild in your own software packages describing the process as you go. And I want you, Mike, to go first, because I think the part of the teaching process, and I wonder if Steve's frozen. I think maybe he can't do it on his computer.
I think he's got internet issues.
Oh, yeah. So, well, look at your thing is smaller. Let's make you a little bit bigger there. I want you to go first, Mike, and bring up your screen. We'll start with a blank screen. We'll start from scratch. We'll bring Steve back on.
Okay, 1 second here.
Yeah, you might not be able to do it, Steve, because you're probably overwhelming your computer. I can see you. I can hear you too. I think it's because we'll bring up Mike's screen. We'll eliminate the chat. Mike's screen is completely gray. Is it supposed to be gray, Mike?
No, I'll put a stock down. See if you just see a single stock.
I just see a gray screen on my end.
So I got like an infinity thing here. Let me stop sharing. Let me try and share again. So if I say window, hang on, share. How about now?
There we go. I'll bring that up on screen. Stand by. Here we go. We are on screen. Mike, okay. I'd like to define the stocks first. In this model, we're not going to have any deaths. So that's the first assumption. We are not, however, going to treat population as a constant. It is going to be a growing stock. So your first stock will be the stock of population. You may name it N, you may name it population, and you will define the units as person.
Okay, just a minute. Let me get a little bit bigger. Person?
Yes.
Person. Oh, fat fingers.
Okay. And we'll give it the initial condition of that stock. Now, proper best practices would be to create another constant, and it'll be 1,000 people persons. So it'll be, 1,000 dimensioned in persons, or person, I guess we're deciding here. And so what Mike's doing right now is he's defining that the initial amount of people in this model is 1,000.
Okay.
Okay, and I think we'll just define the three other stocks, and so we'll have a stock of susceptible people. We'll have a stock of infected people.
Hang on here. Sorry.
That's
Fat
okay.
fingers.
That's okay.
Infected, you say?
Infected.
Okay.
And then a stock of recovered people.
Okay. There's an E in there. Okay,
and so we'll work on an initial number for infected people. Correct? We're going to need one person infected to start this flu off.
hang on 1 second. You said there's one.
One person is infected to start the model.
Okay. Initial infected.
Oh, you're getting pretty fancy in your layout there, Mike.
Yeah. I'm kind of, I don't know, OCD or whatever. I like
Same here. And I like how Stella actually has alignment tools that automatic it looks like it snaps it into place. We'll see if Steve is going to be able to come back on here on his screen.
I'm at. You can hear me, Matt?
I can hear you. We're just building out the model in Stella first.
I can't get the laptop to work. It's something going wrong with the hotel Wi-Fi. I've even Googled my Gmail. Has been waiting 5 minutes. It still hasn't loaded, so I can't even click on the link. So
That's fine, Steve.
I can think of a bit of tune out, guys. So
That's fine.
good to have made a cameo. I'll watch what you talk about here, then I'll disappear.
Okay.
Okay.
So
What do you got?
Okay, Steve. Yeah, I'm trying to give instructions here. So, Mike, we have an initial infected of one person, correct?
Yep.
And it's dimensioned in persons. So susceptible. So everybody's watching here. If we have 1,000 people as an initial condition, one of them infected already, that means there's 999 people that are susceptible to this virus. Mike, put 999 there.
Okay.
And so our initial recovered. Now, Mike, tell me, what do you think about this? When you have a stock that has an initial condition of 0, I was always taught you don't really need to have a variable, a constant to dictate that. You can just not have initial recovered in your model.
It's modeler's choice. I don't think it matters.
Okay. So that's going to be 0 to start the model. Yep. So there's nothing. And so let's decide. So as I understand, Jay Forrester at this process, and now people will go and do the reverse. What's his name? Oh, geez. He used to be the president of the System Dynamics Society, and he always liked best practices. He did the apartment industry model on a video once. Geez, what's his name?
Jim Hines, John Sturman.
No, short little guy, bald with a goatee. Melchinsky. So he always actually worked the reverse. He always suggested to work from your system boundaries backwards. Jay Forrester, when I listened to him, always suggested you start with your system states. We're starting with our system states. So next we want to kind of define the flows of of the different stocks, and we'll start with population. In this model, the population grows, and if I had deaths, there'd be an outflow. So we know that there's going to be net bursts. So we need a flow of net bursts. And so what he's drawing here is a little pipe diagram, and that's representing an inflow of net bursts. And so we've established that's how that stock's going to grow. Next, we'll do susceptible. And susceptible, because recovered people never become susceptible again. There's no immunity. No, I don't think we want to do that. Thank you. And so what we want to do is people become infected. And that's going to be a mutually exclusive flow from susceptible into infected. And you can give it any naming convention you want there. Infections, maybe? Okay, yeah, infection, right. There Mike is a professional at this, so he's actually way ahead of me. And the next one we want to, okay, well, infected people, eventually they're not going to be infected anymore, and they're going to become recovered. So it looks like we need one more mutually exclusive flow. And of course, you can name that with whatever convention you would like. Now, net bursts, because, and this is something we should, we might have skipped at the beginning, Mike. We always like to check what solver we're using and what time dimension we're using. So in your solver settings, I don't know where it is in Stella. Have we defined this? Have we defined this? We want to do in days. Time units of days. Yeah. Okay. And we're using the Euler, which is a first order solver. That's appropriate for an overshoot and collapse model. There's no oscillation. That'll work fine. With net bursts, because we're doing days, we'll need a constant. That's the fraction of bursts, and it'll be dimensioned in 1 over day, or days in the model.
So you want a birth rate coefficient?
Yeah, so birth rate coefficient, we'll make it, yes, so it's self-reinforcing from the stock itself. What Mike just did there, he's saying, well, if the population goes up, there's going to be more births because more people are breeding. Pretty simple self-contained model there. The birth coefficient, Mike, will say is 0.0004. Because remember, this is bursts by day. This is, we don't want anything too fast. And we have this dimensioned in a fraction of a time unit. So it'd be 1 over days as the, you got it. Okay, perfect. So we've defined how the population's going to grow. And if we had deaths, we'd actually have deaths coming out of there from the flu, but we're not going to do that. The next we're going to, Mike, we'll make this one simple, and we'll use time constants. So we'll create a time constant of how long it takes for people that are susceptible to become infected. And we'll say the time constant's going to be 5. And you can give it whatever. Yeah, give it a name like, yeah, that's perfect. And so with a time constant, we're not using a fraction of time. We're actually using the time dimension itself. So it would be dimensioned in days. And we got days. And so we want to, oh, geez, now I got to remember these equations. I'm not even looking at a model right now. We want to take the population, divide it by susceptible, divide it by infected, or times infected.
All right. So what, you want the flow equate, the infection rate?
Yes. So we need, oh geez, I'm doing this out of my head. we need population times susceptibility times infected divided by the infection time, I believe is the equation that we need.
So sorry, you wanted population times what's
Susceptible
okay.
times infected divided by and then wire that to average infection time to the infection rate. We'll
Okay,
do the
so population, sorry, times, or was it divided?
no, times susceptible times infected divided by the infection time. I believe that is the correct equation in my head. So
Real quick, do you want me to define this as the
yeah, so
times?
I've been told that, and this is a modeling preference. Some people would say if you've defined your elements on the canvas, you should go right away define the equation. I guess it's preference. What do you think, Mike, when a modeler's building and you've got all your elements for, let's say, the population stock there? Would you go ahead and just make sure the equation's done, or would you just keep working on other parts of the model? What's your opinion on that?
Rookie modelers will just keep throwing stuff up there, and they'll have 17,000 things on before they run their first simulation. They should not do that. Veteran modelers can get away with a lot because they're familiar with the formulations, and they don't have to simulate at the beginning as frequently.
All right, fair enough. Mike has told the wisdom that we need to know. Okay, let's deal with the recovery rate. This one's going to be an easier equation. We'll create a new time constant, average recovery time, I guess you'll want to call it. And we'll say it's 7, so kind of represents a doubling time of 7 days per se. It's a reasonable number, I think, days. And so this one will be infected divided by the average recovery time. And so, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, and in Stella, you don't have to wire the initial conditions to the stock?
No, in fact, I don't think you can. If you try to do this, see, it doesn't work. Instead, I typed an INI, and it pulls up all the initials, and you just select the one you want.
Oh, okay, interesting. So what I've got Mike to build here is a simple ISR model with an independent population. Now, I've done this model where deaths subtract from population and made it really dynamic. And why I wanted Mike to do that is you have a sort of, I would call it an aging chain type structure with susceptible, infected, and recovery, but you have an independent flow also. And I kind of wanted to add that, Mike, to show how different system states can interact in a larger model and not just have mutually exclusive flows with S, I, and R. So that's why I added that there, Mike. Can you make a basic graph to plot some of this out? And I'll let you, however you want to make a graph, what you think is relevant. Obviously, S, I, and R are pretty relevant to plot. Okay, that's quick and easy. That's quick and easy.
How long are we going to run it? 100 days is the
100 days is probably should, with those parameter settings, should well, some things have gone wrong here, haven't they? Now, in the interest of transparency, Mike did not do these equations. I told him the equations to do, and the model is not working. And I'm thinking it's the equation for the infection rate. Interesting. I'm going to have to pull up my model. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. I'm good at this. Desktop. Tie. Research. System dynamic models. My models. done models. And
Did you want a ratio of infected to population? What fraction of the population is infected? And that's times the susceptible.
say that again.
So if we would take the ratio of infected to population. Okay, so that's sort of a probability of getting infected, and that's, you can say that's times the susceptible, then you get your nonlinear interaction there. Okay, and then over your average infection time, I mean, we can maybe, I don't want to write your equations for you, but I was just thinking maybe for giggles off the top of my head, what happens there. Okay, so if we want to reduce this a little bit.
Just go ahead and try your method. I'm just looking. No, so
that seemed to work. I
in
don't know if you can see my screen.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Can you show how the text version of that equation is written for me?
So here's all the equations. So they're,
Yeah. Oh, I can't see the equations because it doesn't pop up a window. It's just sharing the canvas right now on the sidebar.
oh, you just want to see
when
an individual equation?
Yeah,
Like that?
Yeah, there we go. So that, okay, so okay, you just put brackets around infected and population.
But I divided infection by population. So that's sort of the fraction of population that's infected, and hence it's in some sense a probability that a susceptible person will get it.
Okay, you know what? I'm just looking at the equation, and that's correct. I gave you the wrong equation. I just looked at my model. Guys, Mike is better than me at modeling. I think he beat me out. What I told Mike to do was S times I times R divided by the average infection time, when it should have been S times I divided by R and the average infection time. That is a simple a system dynamic model, and obviously this is very simplified. If you were an epidemiologist, you could have 25 compartments here, people in the hospital, etc., and you could build out this model to a large degree. Now I'm going to do this in Minsky, not to say that Minsky is better, but what it's useful for. Now picture your stocks as bank accounts. So your susceptible is your deposit account. Your infected is your checkings account, right? Picture that in your mind, right? So you can apply system dynamics to a monetary system. I will start a new model, new system, and then I'll share here. And make sure I share so the pop-up windows come into play. I'm just going to share entire screen here, and then we'll get really crazy with the echo view, and I'll make it really big.
Time tunnel.
We'll hide this, and since I can't actually see my screen, Mike, Ravel's on screen for you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this way I'm going to do it on a balance sheet kind of table. Open it up. Some of you have used Ravel. And I'm going to do exactly what Mike did, but I'm just going to do it kind of in a flowchart way. So we had population, which is kind of independent of the other three stocks. So I'm going to define it as an asset in the system. I know this is getting crazy, but if you think about it, your population is the asset of this model. Population. And we already decided before that it's 1,000 people. We decided we're going to have susceptible as another stock. Susceptible. Oops. And we're going to have we're going to have infected. It's another stock. And then, so these are liabilities of your system. And then I'm going to get ingenious here. What's the equity? What's the good outcome of this system? Well, recovered. And we know there's one infected. We got to make sure our row balances to 0 over here if we're, being, accounting consistent. So we got one that's infected. We know there's a population of 1,000 people. That means there's 999 left over. Well, we know there's 999 people that are susceptible, balances the row to 0. Now, this is the process I do it in. I kind of work with, my stocks first, and then I define, okay, what's happening in the flows. We got net bursts. Net bursts. And that's going to increase our stock of the population. So we define that. I'm going to have to figure out that over there. That is actually not necessary in the model, but if I were to expand it, that would come in handy. What else did we have? We had, what did you name? I want to keep the naming convection, infection rate. I think you called it.
Yep.
Infection rate. So the infection rate, as you remember on Mike's model, very intuitive. It had an arrow coming out of susceptible and an arrow going into infected. So we go minus infection rate. And just for a little bit of nuance, when you're using these tables and you're in accounting, you can switch your options to put a CR and a DR to represent a debit and a credit, depending on if it's a liability or an asset. But for now, we'll just use the minus sign and the plus sign. We'll go infection rate. And we've defined our infection rate flows. And then we got our recovery rate. Recovery rate. And that is going to come out of the infected stock and go into our recovered stock, which I've defined as an equity in the system. Recovery rate. And so this is the same diagram that you saw that Mike designed on the canvas with the square boxes and then the mutually exclusive pipes that went between. I've just done in accounting terms. What I want people to see is the kind of the connection made from a traditional system dynamic GUI interface with what Steve did for, monetary balance sheets. And these little placeholders on the side, I want Steve to be the tool, make these the tool pop-ups. Right now, they don't serve any purpose other than knowing what the flow name is. Recovery rate. So we can do that. We've got our stocks and flows defined. I can change this into, an editor mode so you can see the changes over time, let's say, and just put that up there. Now I do my parameters. So now I'm going to decide, okay, what's my system boundaries? We called, what did we call the birth rate fraction? What did you call it on your model?
Birth rate coefficient.
Okay.
Birth rate COEF.
And I'm going to go with a convention that I was always told to use in the path, and with your constants, capitalize them. And actually so I'll go down, and I think this was in one of the D memos. Your stock should be capitalized, the first letter. Your flows and auxiliaries should all be lowercase letters, and your constants should be all capitalized letters. Have you heard of that D memo? I think it was in a D system dynamic D memo, Mike.
I know different people do it different ways. People come from like C programming, do it like they code in C. That sounds very Jay Forrester-ish, but it's certainly modeler's choice, I think. And Jay liked things done his way. In the old days, when your output would come off the mainframe and big giant sheets of green paper, and you had plotter printers where you'd have population would be P, 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 and food would be F, 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 and so forth. You'd have to take a marker and connect the plotted dots, the ordered pairs. And Jay wanted that done with a particular pen called the System Dynamics pen. And if you didn't use the System Dynamics pen, he would not accept it. So So I think it's modeler's style. You can do it however you want, as long as you and everybody else understands what you're doing.
Okay. Interested to see if you heard. So what I do actually, because with Ravel, I use my Greek letters for all my constant parameters, right? Because you can use LaTeX to format it that way. I use small letters for my flows and auxiliaries, and capital letters for my stocks. And then I use the tooltip, because you know how economists like their fancy physics equations, so they all got to be abbreviated letters. And then I use the tooltip method. So when you hold over one of your parameters, it pops up the full name. That's just kind of how I do it. But yeah, like you said, all preference. Just making my simulation parameters the same. I'm using time limit, and we'll call it days. One thing Ravel is deficient on is naming your time units. It's not automatic. You've got to put it in there. I'm using a first order solver. What was your max step size in your model? Was it just one?
No, 0.1.
0.1.
Well, that was the step size. I don't know if you know. It didn't. You don't define a max or a min in Stella. It's just.
I think we'll just stick with 1. We'll go with 1. I'll define my other. So we've got our average infection rate. I think you might have called it. We'll just say that's what it is. You can just type on your keyboard to start the process with Ravel. I believe
average infection time.
Good catch. This is not a flow. It is a time constant. I think we said 5 for that one.
When I ran over 100 days, you didn't really get to see the good behavior. So I think it was 2.34 when I got some modified parameter that worked well.
Okay. What was it?
2.34 days.
2.34 days. And then we had our average recovery time. Yep. Oh, time, yep. And Mike, did you change that one as well?
Yeah.
7 days. We're kind of saying it's a time unit of days. And we'll throw that in. And now we can do our equations. Now, Mike is probably right, because I'm comfortable with this model. I wasn't worrying about equations, but if this was the first time doing it, I would, and Mike was teaching me, I'd be like, okay, but what's the equation for the birth rate? I'd be wanting to know that right away. So I get Mike's point there, but because I'm comfortable, I've just naturally, I wanted to define my variables and just do the equations after. I'll grab my flow variables. I'll grab my stock variables. I'll do the birth rate first. So that was a pretty easy one. It was self-reinforcing off the birth rate coefficient. That gives me my flow. So now my birth rate will grow according to this equation, population times my birth rate coefficient. The equation that I originally screwed up and Mike kindly fixed for me didn't make too much fun of me during that process. I will do correctly in this round, and I can copy that item. In other programs, they call it a ghost variable when you just duplicate a variable somewhere else on screen. In Minsky, you could just copy it. Average infection time, just line this up, grab a divide operator. So we go susceptible times infected, divide it by population, and the average infection time equals my infection rate. And then finally, we've got infected divided by our average recovery time equals our recovered rate. And if people were, let's say, immune for a certain time, I could actually have made this model where I had an immune time, and that at some point you'd move from recovered back into being susceptible again. I could have also had an equation where infected people die, and that would have lowered the population as well. In that case, and it would have made the population stock dynamic. Right now, it's kind of a placeholder scorekeeper. It's not even part of the model, but whatever. And we'll delete that. Maybe just move this over here. I'm really liking Stella's way to snap in your equate. I think it's a little bit faster, to be quite frank. We'll go susceptible, infected, and recovered. Went and deleted recovered. Go up into my browser, grab recovered, and we'll wire it together. Let's make sure I've got my simulation time. We'll just set, I think it's set at infinity. We'll go 100. And if all goes well, we get the same model as Mike. And the reason I want to show this is because if you're in economics and you can have really broad godly tables, like in my national model, where you have 50 stocks all interacting with each other and hundreds of flows. Obviously, these become very complicated. But that's the alternative way. So there's a lot of, why I wanted to do this is there's a lot of good YouTube videos out there, how to use Vincem, how to use Stella. There's not a lot for Ravel because, well, not a lot of people use Ravel. And I wanted this exercise, make sure you save this video so you can watch for later, just what it looks like to transfer, you know, a model in a GUI interface with Stella or Vincem into Minsky. The one downfall of Minsky Ravel is I don't quite like that you can't use you lose that causal loop type diagram, that stock flow type diagram when you do it in a godly table. So you've got your stock flow type table diagram and you can see the logic behind it. But when you're doing your flows on the canvas, you kind of lose a little bit of that design. And another thing with Ravel is you can define your stocks on the canvas to make that kind of stock flow diagram if you want to. But that's a kind of a trade-off in the software package that I found. There is a Phillips diagram. So Mike, we didn't really explore that, but you can look at feedback loop dominance. It's not as flushed out as the Stella program, which I hope, you know, Russell and Steve do, because I think feedback loop dominance that Stella provides is really, really freaking key to understanding your system going forward. I think it's unique to Stella at this point, Mike. I don't think that's in Vincem at all. So that's another part. I'll close this out. Mike and I will talk about system dynamics. I'll stop sharing. Let's get Mike back on the screen. Mike, discuss what we just did there. Discuss the pitfalls, what I was describing there, where we're losing the causal loop diagram, and that can be a integral part of a complex system. But also, there is a case for economists don't even know system dynamics. They should, to a degree, know balance sheets, we'd hope. I know some don't like stock flow consistent accounting. They should kind of understand that aspect, and that's where it might be applicable to bring in economists that don't know system dynamics and present a godly table as opposed to a stock flow diagram. And I think you once mentioned in the past, was it Mark Lavoie, didn't quite understand in the beginning you were using ODEs and maybe use some diagrams, but once you changed it, you were like, he was like, oh, now I get that, et cetera, right? Talk about that a little bit.
So first of all, in software, I've used, if I just going from memory here, I started with Dynamo. I used something called NDTran for a little while. Then Stella came along. I used that for a long time. Then I used PowerSim. Then I used VenSim. And now I'm back to using Stella. And it's because of the various features of the software. When there's minor tweaks, you're not going to switch all your stuff over. But when there's when there's a big software advancement, then it makes sense to switch. So I use Stella right now. I know people who do this stuff in Python. They do it in R. There are dudes running around doing it with spreadsheets. To each his own. So right then and there, however you think about it, the tool that allows you to work efficiently because you think about the modeling, a particular way, that's the tool you should use, right? At least to map stuff out at the beginning. On the matter of feedback, yes, super important. So, when you do systems thinking, you really are mapping out feedback. When you're doing system dynamics, it's feedback and stocks and flows. Stocks and flows create dynamics. You can have dynamics without feedback, but feedback is essential to the idea behind system dynamics. Jay Forrester was a servo mechanism guy, a feedback loop guy at the beginning. Stocks and flows, economists are aware of them. Irving Fisher taught the economics profession about stocks and flows in an 1896 paper. So economists are perfectly aware of stocks and flows. The feedback loops, those go back at least about the same length of time through the beginning of the 20th century. So economists are familiar with feedback loops. They gave Gunnar Myrdal the Nobel Prize for circular and cumulative causation, which is really path dependency, positive feedback processes. But of course, markets, a basic supply and demand system, are negative loops. So it's not like when you point out, and Bill Phillips and Arnold Tustin, people have been doing a cybernetic, Kenneth Boulding approach. So it's not like economists never heard of these things or are unfamiliar with them, but they've never pulled the stuff together like we have. So then, you've got to, if you're doing it in French, but the person you're trying to show doesn't understand French, you got to switch to their language. And then my experience is the light bulbs go on. At least then they understand usually my experience as economists, they don't understand what you're doing. They're like, They're trying to be polite, but they're like, I don't know what the hell this guy's doing. When you translate it into a format they're familiar with, now they see what you're doing. And they may or may not agree with how you've built your Lego structure, but at least they have an understanding. Economists tend to work when they do dynamics in discrete time. Economic data, we talked about economic data are released according to a well-defined schedule. And there's sort of, GDP comes out, nothing happens. The revision comes out, nothing happens. So it's naturally a difference equation format. So when you're doing stuff in continuous time, usually that's quite foreign to economists. But we work in continuous time. However, discrete formulations are not inconsistent with system dynamics. Forrester told us this, and we have pipeline delays and all that stuff in our software, so we can put in discrete formulations if it makes sense. But we're primarily thinking about things in smooth, continuous flows over time. even though economists are familiar with feedback, if you try to claim you guys never heard of it, no, they can shoot you down immediately, but they don't think about why is your model doing what it's doing. They don't think about it in terms of feedback loops. Moreover, when they're looking for policy space, complex feedback systems are very robust. They get locked into certain modes of behavior. Even it doesn't matter. It can be positive or negative loops. It could be path dependency, which is positive feedback loop dominant, or policy resistance, which is negative feedback loop dominant. Either way, you're locked in. You beat on the system. You're trying to drag it, push it this way, and it doesn't move, or it doesn't move very much. Well, this is because of feedback loops. And looking for places to intervene where you can deploy some resources and get the system to change its behavior, you need tools like loops that matter. You got to look for feedback loop dominance and switches in feedback loop dominance. Those tend to be leverage points. So although we can translate ISLM into just even discretely into a system dynamics format, you can take the stock flow consistent Mark Lavoie and Win Godley stuff, translate their book into system dynamics. Any of these things, you can do that. Okay, cool. You went from Fahrenheit to Celsius. The temperature is still the same outside. Who cares? But I can show you how to use how identify these dominant loops and how to use them to find policy space that will allow us to change how the system is behaving. And that's where I think our way of doing things has an advantage over all the other stuff that's out there. But it's not well known. I mean, here we're talking about it, so it's known, I guess, to some people, but it's not taught across in every university in the Western world or something like that.
Correct. I'm actually trying something new right now. It's a side project. And so everybody's heard, well, not everybody, of input-output models. And generally in economics, they're a linear thing. You need a lot of inputs to generate your outputs. And so I've taken my national model, which I've had a difficult time calibrating to the real world. Mike, you understand big systems, and calibrating them are extremely hard if you don't understand all the feedback dynamics. And so during my tests, I decided, okay, I'm going to make this model discrete in quarters, and I'm going to use one input for my model, one that's really dominant. I know it's a dominant part of my model, but I'm going to preserve all my feedback effects. So everything after that, the output is all endogenous feedback loops. And this is kind of my new experiment in calibration. I don't know, have you ever done that in the past where you have a large model, but you want to do some calibrations and some tests, and you might make it discrete? I don't know if you can step your model in other soft, like Stella, you can step it one time step and just observe what the system did, step it another time step, right? So what I'm using is a CSV file with some exogenous data, employment data, and I'm feeding that into the system. So it's kind of like a control of real world data. And then I'm comparing the endogenous output that I get from my model to real world data. And that's kind of my new experiment right now. And I was thinking as I was doing it, boy, oh boy, if I had a traditionally trained economist sitting with me and doing this process, this is something where they could get in and say, oh, I see what you're doing there, because it's a step-by-step discrete time data, and then show them, but now watch this. I'm going to replace that exogenous input with the actual endogenous behavior of the model, and it's going to run by itself, and we're going to see emergent behavior. And I'd love to see the light bulb go off in their head. Unfortunately, real conventional economists, at least on Twitter, don't like me very much. I probably have been a little bit too abrasive to their stuff.
Well, there's one of the things about being an economist, because I'll have professors tell me, even at my institution, well, I don't have a PhD in economics, but I had 7 graduate econ classes when I was doing my whatever. And I'll say, well, that in and of itself doesn't make you an economist. Well, what do you mean? So I said, well, you also, when you're doing a PhD in economics, you're being socialized. into becoming, part of the brother and sisterhood. And you learn all the customs and traditions and hallway talk and stuff that economists worry about that's not in the textbooks. And think about it. If you're trained to the highest level, let's say the PhD level, a certain way, and your supervisors have been prominent economists who have made their bones in the profession, why would you question what you're doing? Why would you change what you're doing, particularly if somebody comes and say, I have this technique from engineering. Let me show you how you should be doing economics. I mean, sociologically speaking, it's like, hey, I met all these other economists through my professors. We write for the same journals. We all sort of teach and use the same tools. We're good. There's no particular need for us to change. And by the way, even if their forecasts are wrong or whatever, their paycheck still comes on Friday. So, it's what incentives do they have to take a hard look and say, I'm spending a lot of time here, but am I really doing anything of value, what have you? There's no incentive, right?
Right. Well, I think we're at 2 hours. I think I'll address the elephant in the room, Joe Polito. He's always on me about my vaping. Now, Joe, I want to tell you, no, it's not. I'm not proud of this, but in my 20s, I was a smoker. Could not run. I could not hike. I could not do fun things. Right. I couldn't enjoy life, and I decided. I was around age 29, age 30, that I didn't want to do this anymore. I wasn't having fun. Like, I realized that the smoking wasn't making me feel better. It was actually literally a chemical addiction, and I was running away from my problems. When I was stressed out about something, instead of dealing with it, I go puff on a cigarette and ruin my life. And I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And this was vaping had just come out. This was about 10 years, 10, 11 years ago. And so I was like, okay, well, you know what? That's got to be better than smoking. So I took it up and I reduced my nicotine intake. So originally it would have a bunch of nicotine, so it would quell the cravings, and I wasn't putting smoke in my lungs. I noticed within 3 months, I could go for a jog, I could go on hikes. And so that's what I've done. And so there are studies where teenagers are putting THC, marijuana, in it, and they're getting what's called popcorn lung. And that's not what these devices were developed for. So there are studies where these can be dangerous if used incorrectly. But for myself, I was worried about lung cancer, and I was worried I couldn't go out and have fun, and I noticed a dramatic difference. Would I like to give this up now? Because now it's literally an oral fixation for me. That's all it is. I'm sitting around here. I'm in underneath these lights. Mike and Steve, they're talking about shit I don't understand half the time. And I feel like I'm not even part of the conversation. So I go to my little crutch, right? And that's why I do it. I want to see more studies on this because I like reading academic papers, and I imagine there are some downfalls about putting vapor into your lungs and what's contained. Now, this is mostly canola, maybe some kind of oils and stuff. And if it's out of China, who knows if there's any metallic stuff in it. But I noticed a dramatic change in my health after I stopped it. My skin got better. Like, I'm 41 years old and I look like I'm in my early 30s. So I agree with what you're saying. Thank you for your concern. But if I meet a smoker nowadays, and they're far and few in between, right? The culture of cigarette smoking it's been completely changed. But if I encounter one, I often tell them, I show them this. I'm like, look, you can turn it up. If you love a coffee and your cigarette in the morning, you can turn it up a little bit so it feels like you're getting a hit of something, and break that habit. And if you know what, we all have crutches in life. We all do, and hopefully some are more healthier than the others. But that's what I do now. So, Joe, I'm doing okay. And if I die from vaping, all the great things, the glaciers I've got to hike on, the Rocky Mountains I've been to, I got to do because I quit smoking because of this. So I'm happy. So I'm dying happy. It's like this, my grandmother. she has emphysema that runs in her family, and her dad, my great grandfather, died of emphysema. A lot of people blame it. He worked on the Empire State Building, so they were all from Nova Scotia, and he said it could have been from all the dust that went in his lung because working conditions were not so good. And she smoked all her life, and she's now has serious lung problems, oxygen tank, and all that. But I often say to old people, when they lecture young people about all the things they shouldn't do, I'm like, you're right, they shouldn't do that, but you should be doing it now because you're in the twilight of your life and you're gonna die anyways. So start smoking, start drinking, start going into the seedy parts of towns, and live your life, right? So what I've done now is I will get to a point where I will live long enough, and I will finally get to hopefully the age of 80, maybe even 90. And I'll be like, it's time to start smoking cigars and drinking a lot of liquor and reading books and looking like Sigmund Freud and having a good time. But you got to make it there first, right? So save those crutches until you're about to die in retirement. That's my motto. Anyways, that's that's my rant. Mike, when are you starting? Is it next week you are starting back?
Next Friday, I'll be before the youngins teaching them system dynamics at this time.
So we might not see much of Mike coming up. Hopefully you can drop it.
Sneak in a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully you can drop in, say hello, let us know what's going on, say hi for 30 minutes and do what you got to do. But just in case, that's why we did this today. I wanted to give Mike some time to talk about system dynamics, which we don't do enough, and it was fun. So anyways,
it was fun. Yeah.
Make sure you hit the, let me do my graphics here before we close out. Let's do this one. Like, subscribe, look at the colors I put, and comment. It matches my like relearning economics thing. I made sure to put pink because I noticed my viewer both on Twitter and here, it's like 5-7% female demographic. Gotta change that. Like, I do my hair really good. See if my wife's listening. I do my hair really good. So anyways, until next week, I'll see you Sunday for the Relearning Econ live stream. I'm going to be discussing a few things we discussed here, mainly Joan Robinson. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 Eastern time, 6 London time, 7 European time. I'm going to be reacting to another economic video. Last week I did Ray Dalio. People go check it out. This week I'm going to be discussing an individual from Canada who's on the CBC News Network, big kind of government news network, talking about the $37 trillion in debt the U.S. has and how that's going to affect their country going forward. It's going to be a lot of fun. He's probably going to have a very mainstream view about it, and I'm not. So that should be a good reaction video. Until then, we will see you again. Bye-bye.
You are now relearning economics.